We have been talking the last couple of weeks. This is the third of a 4 series, and next week we'll finish this up, but we've been talking about the bottom of the ninth. And a lot of times when you come to, some of you that knew me or know me, I played baseball, and I love baseball. Baseball is my sport. When you start talking about football, I understand the premise of what you're trying to do, and that is to get that pigskin across the goal line without getting your head knocked off. And so you're seeing all of these things, but I'm a baseball guy, okay? And a few years ago, went to the Reds game, and it was all of us boys from our family. There was 5 of us. Well, my one brother has his leg amputated, and so we were actually standing kind of along the rail where the handicap seats are at. So he could just basically, move him up there, let him sit down, and then the rest of us were kind of there. So we were there in this game, and the Reds had to win this game in order to get into the divisional championship, okay? So we're there, game's going on, it's the bottom of the ninth, the game is all tied, and we're just hoping that somebody would do something so the game would finish, we could go home, the Reds would then go into the series, and we'd all be happy, right? Well, if you remember the game, they had let's see, I have to remember who was batting where. I think it was Joey Votto, Brandon Phillips, and then Jay Bruce was their lineup for that night, the 3rd, 4th, 5th hitter. Phillips gets up, I think he gets on, and then Votto gets a hit and moves Phillips up into scoring position, and we thought, okay, all Jay Bruce has to do is just go ahead, get a hit, the game's over, everybody's happy, wonderful. So we're along the first base line, kind of up a little bit, along the breezeway there, walking, and kind of a little bit to the left, of the right field foul line. So Jay Bruce gets up, foul ball. I think the next pitch was a ball, and then the next pitch was pitched, and Jay Bruce just launched that sucker. No doubt. Everybody's just standing there saying, "Get out, get out, get out, get up, get out." And all of a sudden, man, when the ball went over the fence and it was a home run and the Reds won, they're all celebrating and everything else. We're high-fiving. Everybody in the stadium is just going nuts. That's what I like about baseball, is when you get those moments in the bottom of the ninth, when the team's up, it's either tied or they're losing, and somebody gets up and they do a dramatic thing, and the game's over. If you know anything about the Reds, when someone hits a home run, fireworks goes off. When they win the game, fireworks goes off. So we had a double dose. They just seemed to be going every which way that night. The smokestack was just going and going up, and everything's going off. They loaded it again, and it's going off, and it's going and going. The Reds are out there celebrating. They're doing their 20 and 30-year-old hop, skip, and jump thing that they do, and piling on each other and everything. And everybody in the whole stand, nobody's leaving, because they want to see what's going on and what's going to happen. So we get excited when we come to the bottom of the ninth and the game is over and we win. I don't know how many of y'all like the Red Sox and the Yankees. Anybody? You both like me, you hate them? The Yankees more than the Red Sox. But it seems like every time that there was a World Series a while back, it was always the Red Sox or a divisional playoff. It just seemed to be the Red Sox and the Yankees were always there. And every time on TV, you'd always see the Red Sox, you'd always see the Yankees and stuff. And so it just so happened that the Yankees kept winning. The Yankees kept winning. You know, they got Derek Jeter. They got all these guys. You know, they've got some of the best baseball players around. They're all on this thing because they've got money. They can load up their team. The small market teams can't load them up as much, but they loaded this team up. And it just so happened that the Yankees, they were up 3-1. Or I'm sorry, they were down 3-1. And so what happens? The Red Sox beat them. The Yankees didn't pull it out. And everybody loved it because the Red Sox finally beat the Yankees. And so many times it's what we end up doing a lot is we begin to root for people. And a lot of times in our life, you fail to realize how many incredible comeback stories there are in the Bible. So let's start just by giving you a few, and then we'll show you where we're going this morning. Do you remember a guy by the name of Daniel? Now here's Daniel. He's a bottom of the ninth event in his life. He is thrown into the lion's den. I don't know about you, but that to me, that is the bottom of the ninth. It looks like there is no way we're coming back from this one. You throw me in a lion's den, that lion sees all this meat. Used to be it was nothing but bones. I might have been able to escape. But since I've gotten married, there's no way. So what ends up happening? They throw Daniel into the lion's den. The next morning, they come running up to the lion's den. And you see Daniel riding the lions like a pony. I'm only kidding. But we don't know. He could have been. Were you there? Did you see it? The Bible just said that the lions didn't eat him. Okay? But we know that here he is. So it was like a bottom of the ninth moment. Now, there was another guy who, he had more than one bottom of the ninth moments. His name was Moses. As a matter of fact, if you look at Moses' life, you'll find that Moses' life was a bottom of the ninth all the time. The day he was born wasn't long. A decree was sent out that they were to kill all of the male children of Israel. And so his mom did not want to see her son dying. So remember, she put him in a basket, hid him among the reeds, the bulrushes. And Pharaoh's daughter came down because she knew that Pharaoh's daughter came down there to bathe. Came down, you hear this rustling and a baby kind of crying. She goes over, gets the baby, and what do? They put Moses, and he raised him in Pharaoh's family and in his place. So then what happens? Moses is being raised by Pharaoh, comes to a point. What happens? These two guys get into an argument, an Egyptian and an Israelite, and Pharaoh goes over and kills the Egyptian. At the bottom of the ninth, buddy, you better get out of town. What did he do? He left. What did he do? He spent 40 years on the backside of a mountain tending to sheep. And then, all of a sudden, he's coming to his out there one day, and God speaks to him out of a bush and says, Pharaoh, Moses, y'all know what I mean. It's rough turning 62. Knowing that you're also on the backside of a mountain going down this way. Moses had 40 more years. I'm just praying I do too. So he says, Moses, he said, take off your shoes. You're on holy ground. And here's what I want you to do, Moses. I want you to go down there and I want you to tell Pharaoh, let my people go. Say what? I know that guy. I can't speak. You'll be okay. So what does Moses do? He goes down and he says, Pharaoh, God says, bottom of the ninth moment, God says, let my people go. Pharaoh could have killed him right there on the spot. But what happened? He says, nah, I'm not going to kill you, but I'm not letting him go. So what happens? Pharaoh says, nope. Moses had another bottom of the ninth moment. Okay, God, I told him, let your people go. And he says no. So we're done, right? No, here's what I want you to do. I'm going to send a plague upon them. And when I send a plague upon them, I want you to go down there after the plague, and I want you to say, God said, let my people go. How many bottom of the ninth moments do you need in your life? Every plague, he's going back and telling him, let my people go. When Pharaoh could have really been nasty and said, I'm going to kill you, Moses. You are the cause of all the problems of this place. I am sick and tired of you coming up to me and telling me, God said, let my people go. I can get rid of you, but he didn't. So he lets them finally go. So Moses is going down the road, goes up on the mountain, comes down off the mountain. The people are in a mess. Pharaoh's supposed to be leading them to the promised land. And God says, okay, this is the bottom of the ninth. Now, Moses, you see the promised land? You're not going. You disobeyed me. I'll let you see the promised land, Moses, but you can't go. There are times, ladies and gentlemen, that every once in a while when we get into the bottom of the ninth, we don't always win. There are some times in the bottom of the ninth we lose. And sometimes when you look at the Bible, you see people like David, you see people like Peter, Abraham, Ruth, and then you see Jesus. It's Friday. He's in the grave. He's dead. The bottom of the ninth moment. And so many times what we think is in the Bible, everything worked out fine. All of the bottom of the ninth moments, they just seem to be okay. But today we want to talk to you about a guy out of Acts chapter 7 who had a bottom of the ninth moment. And if you look at it, you would see and think that he lost. In Acts chapter 7, verse number 51. While you're getting there, let me give you some background of what's going on and what's happening here. There was a guy by the name of Stephen, okay? And this story here is one of those bottom of the ninth stories that's a little bit different than all of the rest. And the story of Stephen doesn't really play out the way that we would like it to play out. It doesn't end the way that we would want things to end. You see, because if you read in the Bible, there are four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And those four books chronicle the life of Christ. And then all of a sudden, you come right after there, you come to the book of Acts. And the book of Acts basically is chronicling the church, in the early church. And so what you're doing in the first few chapters of the book of Acts is you're watching the story unfold of the church as it begins, and as it's starting to bless and starting to grow, and things are occurring and things are happening. Okay? And so what happens is, then when you get into chapter 6, you bump into a guy by the name of Stephen. You see, because with the church, there came some issues. There was a lot of women and orphans. And it seemed like that nobody was taking care of them. It seemed like that they were kind of being left aside. So they came to the disciples, the apostles, and they said, listen, guys, we've got a lot of widows, we've got a lot of orphan children, and they're not being taken care of. And guys, we need you guys to go over there and take care of them. And they said, you don't understand. It isn't that this is below us, but it's that the church is growing so much, and we've got to get out here and prepare the Word and get into the Word, and we've got to teach people. So here's what you need to do. You need to find 7 guys full of the Holy Spirit. And what you need to do is you need to put these guys in charge of that ministry. And what you find is one of those guys was Stephen. Okay? And this is what Stephen was going to do. Okay? So, here's what happens. Stephen and Philip are 2 that you look at that basically were preachers, and the other 5 you really don't hear much about, but you hear about those 2. But here's what happened with Stephen. Stephen started talking or going over here to this town and to this place, and he was taking care of the orphans, and he was taking care of the widows, and while he was over there, he was sharing about Jesus. And people were getting saved. And the church was growing. So Stephen would take care of them, and he would start talking to them about Jesus, and people would start getting saved. And so then it was, Stephen had to go over to this other town. And when Stephen went over to this other town, he started taking care of the orphans, he started taking care of the widows, he started telling people about Jesus, and the next thing, people started getting saved. Well, the problem was, they thought they got rid of this guy named Jesus. And when we got rid of Jesus, we thought if we got rid of him and we killed him, then all of his other followers, they would just disband and go away. We've seen this before. People have come onto the scene, they claim to be the Messiah, they've had some followers, and as soon as they died, their followers disbanded and just left. But these guys, they're not leaving. Matter of fact, we got some issues here. Because instead of their numbers getting smaller, their numbers are getting larger. And there's this guy, Stephen, who is one of the biggest culprits of the whole movement. He's telling people about Jesus, and everybody's beginning to follow this teaching. He is really causing us an issue, and we need to do something about it. So what do? They bring him in front of the Sanhedrin court, and they say, listen, you've got to stop this stuff. We don't want you telling anybody anymore about this story. So, Stephen is there, and there's a couple things that you need to look at with Stephen. Remember when Jesus was brought before the Sanhedrin court, and they trumped up the charges? Guess what they did to Stephen? They brought him before the Sanhedrin court, and they trumped up the charges. We can't really find anything wrong that he's doing, so what we're going to do is we'll kind of like make up some charges that everybody will turn against him. Okay? And then, remember when they asked Jesus, what do you got to say for yourself? And he just, they said, you know, everybody says that you're the king of the Jews. What do you got to say? And he says, you said so. Well, the problem was, they asked Stephen, they said, okay, here's the charges that's been brought about you. What do you have to say for yourself? Stephen was a little bit more vocal. Look at what he said, starting in verse number 51. You stiff-necked people with uncircumcised hearts and ears, you are always resisting the Holy Spirit. As your forefathers did, so do you. Which of the prophets did your fathers not persecute? They even killed those who announced beforehand the coming of the righteous one, whose betrayers and murderers you have now become. You received the law under the direction of angels, and yet you've not kept it. When they heard these things, they were enraged in their hearts. They gnashed their teeth at him. But Stephen, filled with the Holy Spirit, gazed into heaven. He saw God's glory with Jesus standing at the right hand of God, and he said, look, I see the heavens opened, and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God. Then they screamed at the top of their voices. They stopped their ears. They rushed together against him. They threw him out of the city and began to stone him. And the witnesses laid the robes at the feet of a young man named Saul. They were stoning Stephen as he called out, Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. Then he knelt down and cried with a loud voice, Lord, do not charge them with this sin. And saying this, he fell asleep. So when you begin to look at what's going on here, and they asked him, they said, okay, Stephen, what do you got to say about yourself? Jesus said, well, it's as you say. And then Jesus was silent. Stephen wasn't having any bit of this one. I'm going to tell you all what I think of you. And you probably are not going to like it. Because Stephen is now in the bottom of the ninth. The game's tied. Stephen's up to bat. And guess what he's doing? He's swinging for defenses. Defenses, not defenses. He is swinging to defend himself. And he's hoping and praying that what he's got to say will change their heart, so that he can go to another town and preach another message and see more souls saved. He's doing the best he can to win in this bottom of the ninth moment. But what you end up seeing is Stephen did this. He says, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take you all on a journey. Matter of fact, I'd like to take you on to a journey all the way back to the beginning. And I'm going to start with all of the Old Testament, and I'm going to show you what this all meant. Sound familiar? He began to tell them everything about the Old Testament. The only difference was Jesus was telling his people everything in the Old Testament that related to him. Stephen was telling them everything in the Old Testament that related to them, and what they had done, how they killed that prophet, and how they killed that prophet, how that when the angels came and gave the message to your forefathers, you didn't listen to them. What did you do? You killed the prophet. And as a matter of fact, the ones that's been telling you about the coming of the Messiah, you destroyed them. You persecuted them. He said you stiff-necked and did the worst thing that you could ever say to a Jewish person. You uncircumcised person. Your heart has not been torn away. It's still got the old Jew. That's who you are. You're hanging on to your message or your beliefs and not to the message of Jesus. He was swinging as hard as he could for that pitch because he wanted to tell him. So he goes all the way back and he begins to do these things. When he began to call them an uncircumcised stiff neck, it was like telling somebody a joke. And the problem was they're angry. It's like somebody coming up to you. I don't know how many people ever did this to you, but remember when they would come up and they would try to rile you, and they would say, your mama's so fat, and then they would say something, you know, or your mama's this or your mama's that. And remember how that would make you mad and would upset you, that you just want to just beat the snot out of them, right? This is what Stephen was doing to them when he began to start calling them uncircumcised. It was almost like, your mama's fat. And they're getting all riled up about him and about him. And so, Stephen wasn't too bright because he just started needling them more and more and more. And he begins to do these things. And they're really angry about everything that's there. He was telling them, he says, listen, they came and they gave you these messages and you haven't obeyed them. That was it. We've heard enough out of you. You have absolutely made me mad. But when you begin to look at Stephen, Stephen was like the guy, he's a good guy. He's a guy that's in the church that when somebody says, we need a building campaign, he would be like the first one on the line saying, I pledge. We need to do this ministry. Stephen would be the first one on the line saying, I'll do it. Stephen was the good guy in the story. And they're getting mad at the good guy. And now they're getting angry and they're getting upset. Most of the time, people would have thought, okay, well, here's what God's going to do. This is the bottom of the ninth moment for Stephen. God's going to take care of him. It's going to be okay. And everybody else is going to die. So what happens? He says, no, that's not the way it is. You see, because the way they're getting rid of Stephen is they're taking him out of town. They're angry. They don't want him in town. They want him out of town. And they are crowded around him and forcing him out. They're getting angrier and angrier and angrier as they begin to move. And then they ended up, what did they do? They took his outer garment off, and they laid it down at the feet of a young man that was standing there watching. As all of a sudden, the first rocks are being picked up and thrown at Stephen. And I don't know about you, but if you've ever been hit by a rock, it hurts. It hurts. And so what ends up happening? They lay this stuff down at the feet of a young man. And somebody thought, well, okay, maybe when they lay these things down, one of the witnesses will stand up and say, no, we made this story up. You don't stone this man. But what happened? It didn't go that way. It said that while they were stoning him, Stephen prayed, Lord, receive my spirit. Sound familiar? when they were crucifying Jesus? He said, Lord, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. Maybe people were thinking that while they were crucifying Jesus, remember what he said? He said, God, don't hold this sin against them. And what did Stephen say? Father, don't hold this against them. Forgive them for what they're doing. But then, what you end up seeing is that Jesus prayed for the people. Stephen did the same thing. But then, all of a sudden, what you find is that maybe God just wants to bring Stephen to the brink of death and bring him from there. And the bottom of the ninth, he's going to win. And what you see is, the Bible says that, guess what? It didn't work that way. The rocks didn't turn into sponges. They stayed rocks. And it said that then Peter or Stephen fell asleep. In other words, he's dead. He's dead. Luke wrote the book of Luke, and he wrote the book of Acts. And when he used the terminology that he fell asleep, he wasn't saying that while the rocks were hitting Stephen, he took a nap. What he was saying was when the rocks were hitting him in the face, it took the life out of him. And he died. So, what do you do with that? You ever have like those times when you talk about a David or Goliath moment? Or maybe you've had those John and Peters and Abrahams. I know how to do with that. But what happens, God, when I come to a bottom of the ninth moment in my life? And I don't win? What happens if I get a bottom of the ninth moment in my life and I lose? How do I deal with that? Some of you probably have known people who have been defeated in their lives. Maybe because I don't know if you've ever watched some games, like a baseball game. The guy was standing there with his hands on the bat, watching for that ball to come through, and he had prepared for this and prepared for this and prepared for this. And it's the bottom of the ninth. There's a runner on second. All he needs is a hit, and they'll win the game. And he strikes out. Everybody in the stadium goes home. The lights get turned off. And that player is still standing there with that bat in that hand, thinking, I let these people down. I didn't win. Maybe you are going through bottom of the ninth moments right now in your life. Maybe you just got a notice from your job. They're letting you go. And you're thinking, what am I going to do now? I've got bills and I've got a house. I've got kids who are dependent on me. And you pray to God, God, would you help me here? I'm losing my job, and God, I'm going to lose my house. I'm going to lose everything I got, God, because I don't have any money to pay for anything. And you're stepping up the bat, and it's the bottom of the ninth. And you're thinking, God, you're going to help me here, right? You're going to help me. And then all of a sudden you swing. And you don't hit the ball. You lost. According to you. Or maybe you're in a marriage that's falling apart. Everything seems to be going wrong. But you love the person. And that person came up and said, I don't love you no more. I found somebody else. I'm walking out. And you're there at the bottom of the ninth, and you're saying, God, how can this happen? I've invested 45 years of my life in this person. I thought I knew them, and I thought they loved me. I love them more than life itself. How can they, at this point in time in my life, how can they drop me for somebody else? God, I don't understand this. And all of a sudden, your life falls apart. Or let's say at home. You've been hurting, but you don't know why. You make an appointment with the doctor. The doctor says, I can't find out why. They run some tests. They call you from the doctor's office and they say, we need to talk to you. And when they tell you that they need to talk to you, you know right then and there, there's something going on here. Otherwise, they would have told me that everything came out okay. So things start running through your mind. And all of a sudden, you go in, you see the doctor, and the one thing that you don't want to hear, you heard. The C word. I need to tell you, you got cancer. Okay, so what do we do now? Well, here's what we can do. I can try and make you as comfortable as I can for the next few months or the next few weeks because it's aggressive and we can't do anything with it. You come home, your life is devastated, and you pray, God, why me? God, can't you heal me? You've healed everybody else. And then all of a sudden he doesn't. And you feel like you lost. And everything in your life, God, this bottom of the ninth moment is gone away. I have nothing else to live for. That's generally our thoughts. But can I share something with you? Let's go back to Stephen for just a moment. Stephen is there. And here's what happened. Stephen is standing there and he's getting hit with all of these rocks. And Stephen begins to die. The life is going out of him. And the next thing you know, Luke writes the words, and he fell asleep. You would think at that point in time, his life is over and he lost. Let's read the rest of the story. You see, because all of a sudden, because they started persecuting Stephen, they didn't stop with Stephen. They started persecuting every Christian. And as they began to persecute the Christians the Christians began to leave Jerusalem. And as they began to flee Jerusalem, they started going out into other cities and other towns and other countries. And guess what they did? They started telling everybody about Jesus. And guess what happened? People started getting saved. The church started growing. Stephen's bottom of the ninth moment that everybody thought he lost, let me say something to you. Stephen won. Because of his persecution, they started thinking, let's persecute everybody else. And when they started persecuting everybody else, they all fled. The gospel of Jesus Christ got migrated and went to everywhere that it could go. And people started getting saved. And when they got saved, they started telling everybody else. So when Stephen fell asleep, Stephen was in the presence of the Lord. What did Paul say? To be absent in the body is to be present with the Lord. There are going to come times in your life that you're going to hit a bottom of the ninth moment. And you're going to think it's over. But let me say this to you as a Christian. Whatever it is that you're going through, and whatever you think that is the bottom of the ninth moment, ladies and gentlemen, if you are a true child of God, you will eventually be rid of all of these moments. Because one of these days, you're going to go home, and when you do, you're not going to have to worry about finances, marriage, children being disobedient, and everything else. You're not going to have to worry about, am I going to have a house tomorrow? Am I going to have food tomorrow? And where am I going to live? Amen. Those are the things that we fail to realize. The very best thing that we can realize is when the game's over, we're going home. We're out of here. So when Stephen saw maybe, and everybody thought his whole life was falling apart, it began a movement like never seen. And guess what? Satan, who thought he could squash this movement by getting rid of Jesus, guess what happened? It grew. When Satan thought that what he could do is squash these people that knew Jesus, and he persecuted them and killed them, guess what it did? It grew. The young man where the clothes were laying at the feet of him who was persecuting the Christians, at the end of his life, he thanked God for all of these people that helped him. He went from a persecutor to the persecuted. And people didn't know what was going on and what was happening. And so, most of the time, and maybe right now, this is the way you feel in your life. The stadium is empty. The crowd is left. And you failed. And you're standing there all by yourself, thinking, game's over. It's finished. What I'd like for you to do is finish this service different than any other service. And before we even get an invitation, here's what I want to talk to you about. I want you to say, God, here's what I'm doing. There are things in my life right now, God, that I'm going through. And God, they're hurting. And God, they're bringing pain. whether it's marriage, kids, finances, whatever. And God, this is the way that I've been praying for it to turn out. And maybe some of you have even spoke the words. God, I'll serve you better if you'll do this for me. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to change it. And God, I'm going to serve you better even if it doesn't turn out the way I want it to. That I'm going to stake it out in my heart, Lord, to serve you the best I can, no matter what. Even if, God, I'm having a bottom of the ninth moment and I don't come through the way that I want to. So this morning, what I'd like for you all to do is I want you to bow your heads. And every once in a while, we used to do kind of a responsive reading. Today, we're going to do a responsive prayer. And here's what I want you to do. Is I will lead and just repeat back to God what I just said, okay? So let's go. Heavenly Father, while I do not desire to be in this circumstance, nor in the future, I do want you to use every game for your glory. And for your good. In my bottom of the ninth moments, give me strength to fight for what you would fight for. But if I lose the game, I pray that I will finish strong and increase the faith of others. And I pray this in your Son's name. And everybody said, amen. So as we get an invitation, there's some of you here this morning that have never ever started a relationship with Christ. And you may be in the bottom of the ninth moment in your life right now. You see, because here's the deal. There are only so many times that God's going to come visit you before he realizes that your heart is so hard he can't penetrate it. And if you hit that time and that line, God, and let me say this to you, God will make you a promise. Here is the line. I will deal with you up to the line. Once you go over the line, I deal with you no more. You lose. You lose. And there's no more getting back in the game. You see, because God will only deal with you so long. And every time when he's dealing with you and asking for that relationship with you, every time you turn that away, you run the risk of gambling that God will never come back, or that God will come back to you one more time. I don't know about y'all. I don't like those odds. That's why God says you need to come to him now while the Spirit is drawing. While there's time. For those of you that are here that are Christians and you're at the bottom of the ninth moment and you've been praying to God and it seems like that what's happening is nothing is going right. And you're to the point of giving up because it seems like he just doesn't love me anymore because he's not doing what I want him to do. Let me say this to you. You need to tell him right here, right now, that prayer. God, even if this game doesn't turn out the way that I want it to turn out, God, I'm going to serve you. So that my life, God, will be an inspiration to the next person and to the next person. My brother, as many of y'all know, his testimony. Went to the doctor and the doctor told him he had thyroid cancer. And had to go through all kinds of chemo and everything, and his voice now is raspy. And then it comes back somewhere else. And we've talked about this. You know what God did with him? Every time he would go to an appointment, God was placing somebody in that room that needed to know about Jesus. And guess what he did? I'm going through the same thing you're going through, but I've got somebody going through it with me. It may not turn out the way that I want it to turn out, but let me tell you this. I'm going to serve him. The question is, what are you going to do? It's easy to sit down and quit and say, God, I thought you promised me you would take care of me. You know what he's saying? I will. I told you I would heal you, didn't I? I'm doing that. Not healing you the way that you may have wanted to be healed. But let me say this to you. One of these days, you'll get the ultimate healing. And you'll be touched by the best doctor there ever was. He is called Jesus.
Hello, this is Pastor Chuck Cotton from Calvary Baptist Church. First of all, I'd like to say thank you very much for taking the time out to either listen to our sermon or to watch it on video. We are grateful that you've actually taken the time and hope and pray that it has been a blessing to you as it was to us as we delivered it to our congregation. We ask if you have any questions whatsoever that you email us at pastorchuck@calvarybaptistmiddletown.org, or you could come in and give us a phone call, if you would please, at area code 513-423-7251. I'd like to take this opportunity to also invite you to come to our church and visit us, if you would please. We actually have small groups on Sunday morning starting at 9:30, with our morning worship following at 10:45. Prior to our morning small groups, we also provide donuts with coffee, milk, orange juice, a time for fellowship, get to know each other, have a good time before we actually break out into our small groups for Sunday. Our worship services are uplifting, they're fast moving, and everything in our service is just a fast pace. But we do take time every once in a while to slow down as we feel the Holy Spirit moving, and we never want to hinder it in any way. We also have on Sunday evening, during the school year, we have Awana, and Awana starts with the Puggles, actually from age 2 all the way up through high school. And during that period of time, we also have a worship service. Both of these start at 6 o'clock and end at 7:30. Our Wednesday night, we have a Bible study, which starts at 7. We generally finish about 8:15. We would love for you to come and visit with us. Don't have to dress up. Just come as you are, because to us, it doesn't matter. You're a child of God, a creation of His, and so to us, you're important to everything that we do. Our motto here is building the kingdom one life at a time, and we hope that we have a chance to visit with you, get to know you as you get to know us. So thank you, and may God bless you.